The Vegetarian by Kang, Please Look After Mum by Shin Kyung-sook, The Whole by Pyeongyang. All of these internationally acclaimed Korean novels have one thing in common. They all had the same international literary agent, Barbara Zitwer, who is our guest today for Touch Base in Seoul. She's been heralded as a key figure responsible for the Korean New Wave in global publishing, and for that work she won the International Literary Agent of the Year award in 2016. She's also a writer herself, and she's published a new book called The Korean Book of Happiness, chronicling her experiences of Korea. And I'm glad to say that she joins us via video call now. Ms. Zitwer, thank you for your time today and for coming on the show.
Oh, sure. My pleasure.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. I gave a brief introduction, but can you, in your own words, introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Well, I'm a literary agent. I have my own company, and I represent authors from all over the world and try and find great publishers and help people build careers. And when I discovered Korean books about 12 years ago, I was at a point in my career where I did not find that many interesting books to represent. And I thought I was a great agent, but I didn't have any books that I wanted to represent. And so I was having dinner with a Korean co-agent, friend of mine, and I just lamented to him that I needed to find great books, and I just spurted out, aren't there any fabulous young hot novelists in Korea? And he looked at me like a light bulb went off in his head, and he said, yes, there are. And it seemed like no one had ever asked him that question before. And I think probably no one had asked him that question. And he started telling me about some authors, and actually the first book author I represented was Young-ha Kim, and his book, I Have the Right to Destroy Myself. And Young-ha Kim was at home in Korea. It was the morning. We were in New York at night. Young-ha Kim speaks English. My friend called him on the phone, and I had a conversation with him, and I was so excited. And that was the beginning of it. And I really discovered Korea through literature and these incredible novels.
What was it about Korean literature that made you so excited? What was different about it?
I think for me, the writing was, it was literary, it was very original, had an unusual point of view. It was very different, and it had mystery, and I had never read anything like it. I had never read a book like I Have the Right to Destroy Myself. Kyung Jo's Tongue was another of the first books I sold. And the way she wrote and described her story, I could only say it seemed like a white velvet sword. That's how I describe her writing. It's
a
like
white velvet sword.
Sharp, yes.
Right.
Sharp, penetrating, gets you in the heart, but it's like white velvet. It was so beautiful, the language, and The Vegetarian was like nothing I had ever read. And also, I think Pyong, Ashes in Red, was one of the first books I read. And for me, it was reading a classic, 1984, Fahrenheit 451. I mean, it was just, that book was so brilliant. And it took me several years to read the book in English, because I read a partial of the book.
Right.
And then I had to sell the book in order to get financing for the entire translation. So I would read chunks of it as it was being translated. But I was so familiar with the book that I would get a chunk in and I wouldn't have to go back to the beginning. I just read on. And what amazed me when I finished the book was that the protagonist ended up exactly where he started.
Hmm.
And to me, it was genius. I mean, I think she should win the Nobel Prize. Hyun-pyun, and to me, no, really, she's so remarkable. Her writing, her language, her sparse originality, but her depth of characters, and she's very concerned with the environment and the
Hmm.
world. And Ashes in Red, what this man goes through, it's like Ulysses on a journey through hell, and then he ends up exactly where he started. And this is an amazing book. And then I think also at the beginning, I was representing a lot of women writers, and
Right.
I think that Ji Young Gong, Our Happy Time. Then, of course, I discovered Please Look After Mom and Kyung-sook Shin.
Hmm.
And that book really, I knew as soon as I read 20 pages, this is the book. This is the book. It's a global bestseller.
Hmm.
It's a New York Times bestseller. This is a book for everyone. I fell in love with it. I had not read the whole. I read 20 pages, and I remember that I didn't know Kyung Suk Shin at the time, and I really wanted to represent the book. And
Right.
I kept saying to my Korean co-agent, "What's happening with this book? What's happening with this book?" And he was like, "Don't worry, don't worry." So I decided that I was going to write her a letter myself.
Right.
And I sat down and I wrote her a letter and I told her what I thought. And I told her that I haven't read the book, but I feel like I read it. I loved it. And it would be a New York Times bestseller. It would sell in
Sure.
40 countries. Well, and she picked me, and it happened.
So explain a little bit. Why do you think Korean authors or Korean books hadn't been as successful before, even if they had perhaps been translated? Perhaps why didn't they find the success that you helped them reach in the end?
Okay, this is my opinion. Um, First of all, there had been a few Korean books published by tiny publishers who are either academic or very tiny with very tiny distribution, and basically they really weren't sold on any major level.
Hmm.
And I think that my success was that I know what books are going to be completely international,
Hmm.
global,
Hmm.
and that will appeal to people. Like I can feel it in my bones. I just
Right.
hear a story, I know it.
Yeah.
So, first of all, you have to pick the right book. Then, another big problem is that there were not really great translations.
Hmm.
And like for instance, The Vegetarian took me over 10 years to sell in Germany. And in many countries, I represented that book for 10 years before I sold it.
Hmm.
No one understood it, no one got it. But in Germany, finally, I was able to sell it with my co-agent because we convinced the publisher that the translation he had read was bad. And it wasn't the book that was bad, it was the
Right. Interesting.
translation.
Hmm.
And so we convinced him, and
Hmm.
he got a great translator. So I think a lot of the material that is shown, it's not well translated.
Sure.
I think it's not promoted. I never looked at Korean books as other or
Hmm.
Korean books.
Right.
I looked and I presented and sold them as great literature.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter. At the beginning, I would tell, people would think I was crazy or what are you doing? What are these
Sure.
things?
Sure.
And I would say, don't worry about it. They're not, don't even think they're Korean. They're just great.
Yeah.
And now, of course, I've seen such a change in everybody wants Korean books.
Indeed. How do you feel when you see that change? You've helped Korean literature reach this wider global audience, winning multiple prizes. For example, The Vegetarian, one, of course, the Man Booker International Prize. Please Look After Mum was a New York Times bestseller, of course. The Whole was the Shirley Jackson Award winner. How do you feel when you see all that recognition now?
I think it's fantastic. It's remarkable. I see so many, like when I would come to Seoul or I would have Korean books, there was not one other agent. There was no European or American at the book fair in Seoul or in Korea. Now everyone is going to Seoul.
Hmm.
Every agent wants a Korean book. There are many other Korean books that I don't represent that are doing fabulously. Um, and it's it's thrilling. I mean, I feel really happy, and what I wanted was to make Korea. I wanted people to read Korean books like they read English language books, like
Right.
Shakespeare or Beatrice Potter, or
Hmm.
there's all kinds. It's not pigeonholed into one kind of a writer, and
Right.
so I think it's fantastic.
Well, over the years, it seems like you've not just fallen in love with Korean literature, but with Korea itself, so much so that you have written a book. It's called The Korean Book of Happiness. I believe you share in the book everything you have learned about the country and the culture during your travels here, from your time in Seoul to your travels meeting Buddhist monks in a temple, even some of your favorite recipes, I understand. So can you tell us more about this book? How did it come about?
Well, it came about for two reasons. Every time I've been to Korea about 5 times, and every time I went, even my first time, I didn't go meet publishers. I met all the writers I represent. We went to restaurants, we went to parks, we went to museums, and then I traveled. I went to the DM zone the first time I was there. I went to a temple stay. So my experience was mind blowing. I had the most profound experience at the temple stay. And then each time I went back to Korea, I went traveling to
Hmm.
another place, another temple, another island. I One of the most incredible places I went to was the Museum of Nature that Tadio Ando, the
Sure,
Japanese
Ando Tadao.
architect, yeah, who just won the Pritzker Prize. He designed this museum of nature in Korea, and the whole idea of the museum is to disconnect to connect.
Hmm.
It's in the middle of the mountains. It's incredible. So after all these years, so about 3 years ago, I was sitting around thinking about, well, once again, I don't have any books to sell. What should I do? So I thought there are books kind of like the Little Book of Heigi or Ikigai, which
Hmm.
were, the Japanese way of happiness,
Right.
or the Danish. So I thought, oh, that would be great to have a Korean book like that.
Hmm.
And I looked everywhere and there was none. So I decided, well, I'll write it myself because I learned so
Sure.
much. And I fell in love with Korea and I had so many great experiences.
Sure.
And the other reason was that from the beginning of my working with Korea and going there, everyone would say to me, and they still do say to me, "What's with you in Korea? Like,
Hmm.
why?"
Right.
So now I can give them my book.
Okay, so what do you want readers to take away from it?
Well, I want them to be inspired. I want them to see the beauty, the originality, the mystery. I want them to discover. It's like
Hmm.
I was at a dinner party the other night and someone was talking about my book and they said, what is it like?" I said, I took their hand. I said, "I want to take you by the hand and come with me to Korea."
Hmm.
And a lot of people I know have been to Korea only to Seoul or on business, and they said, we've never heard of any of these places that you've been to or write about. So I think that there's so much beauty, profound contentment. I found a lot of contentment, peace. I found safety,
Hmm.
like walking the streets of Seoul at 12 o'clock at night with a girlfriend alone. We were both baffled, like, can you imagine doing this in New York City or Rome or
Hmm.
London? No. And there's just so much, and I think it's a remarkable country. I think it has so much richness from food and tea and the way of life. One of the first things I recognized, and I thought this is
Right.
so smart,
Hmm.
fashion wise, is that I looked around and all the women were wearing flats. No one wears high heels. I mean, some women do, but
Sure, sure.
the style is a lot of everyone wears sneakers or flats, and I'm
Hmm.
like, of course. That's why people are so happy.
Well, perhaps that is a one road to happiness, wearing flats. But yes, it sounds like a very interesting read. I think our listeners will enjoy it as well. We're out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. But it was a delight to speak to you today. The Korean Book of Happiness is out now, and we've been talking to the author and literary agent, Barbara Zitwer. Zitwer, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Can I add one more thing?
Sure. Yes?
One more thing I wanted to add is that the book is filled with personal stories and anecdotes by some of the most famous writers in Korea
Mm.
who gave me their recipes. Young Dong Lee, Jang Yu Zhang, Kyung-sook Shin, Won-pyung Sohn. Her recipe is fantastic and so easy. So I think people will really enjoy reading about these stories that my Korean writer and friends have given me to incorporate in the book.
We'll definitely look out for that too. Once again, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.